To bring together more than 60 personal artifacts that were brought to America by survivors of not only the Holocaust, but genocides from around the world, including Armenia, Bosnia, Cambodia, Iraq, Rwanda, South Sudan, and Syria. After their presentation, you'll have the opportunity to ask questions during a short Q&A session. So be sure, as something maybe trips a thought or a comment, be sure to post it in the comments below here on Facebook Live, and we'll get to as many questions and comments as we can after the presentation. In the meantime, be sure to let us know where you're watching from tonight, whether you're watching from around Illinois, across the nation, or even around the world. We'd love to hear from where you're watching from tonight. You're going to learn about the relationship between objects, their meaning to the original owner, and subsequent significance, all told dramatically and paired with oversized photographs and handwritten responses by survivors or their family members. And of course, the exhibit's been open since late March and will be with us through the early to mid part of January in 2023 here at the ALPLM. A little bit about our two presenters tonight that you'll hear from. Arielle Weiniger is the Chief Curator of Collections and Exhibitions for the Illinois Holocaust Museum and Education Center, where she leads the curatorial and custodial responsibilities for the museum's collection of over 30,000 historical objects and artworks. She is also the manager of all aspects of exhibition planning and implementation for both the core, ongoing, and special exhibitions. Arielle holds a MA in Near and Middle Eastern Studies from the University of London and a BA in Art History and Photography from the University of Iowa. She is a highly regarded museum professional with over 20 years of museum experience. Jim Lomason is an award-winning photographer and author living in Portland, Oregon. He received the Dorothea Lange Paul Taylor Prize from the Center for Documentary Studies at Duke University for his first book, Shadow Boxers: Sweat, Sacrifice, and the Will to Survive in American Boxing Gyms. His 2015 book and traveling exhibition, Exit Wounds, Soldier Stories, Life After Iraq and Afghanistan, is about U.S. veterans from the Iraq and Afghanistan wars and their lives after their return from war. Lomason's What We Carried, Fragments and Memories from the Cradle of Civilization is an ongoing collaborative effort in a storytelling project with displaced Iraqi and Syrian refugees who have fled to the U.S. And What We Carried, Fragments and Memories from the Cradle of a Civilization book that was published for an exhibition at the Ellis Island Museum of Immigration in 2019. We welcome Arielle and Jim virtually to the Abraham Lincoln Presidential Library and Museum for tonight's program. A very pleasant good evening to you both.
Thanks for having us.
Thank you so much for having us. It is, I think, a huge honor for both Jim and I to have this exhibition at the Abraham Lincoln Library and Museum. We've yet to have the exhibition at a presidential library, and it's, of course, very fitting that it's in Illinois. As we'll see and talk about tonight, the vast majority of the survivors that are included in this exhibition come from the state of Illinois. Or surrounding areas. So it is really a very local yet national and global story that we're telling in this exhibition. So I'm going to share a PowerPoint, and Jim is going to lead us through the process of some of his earlier work and how we arrived together at the Stories of Survival exhibition. So I will share that now. And maybe somebody can just make sure that it's all looking good as I do. So how are we looking? Is everything all right? Everybody see the screen?
It looks good on my end.
Okay, great. So Jim, I am going to hand it over to you.
Okay, thank you, Arielle. And thank you, Joe. Basically, what I'm going to do quickly is just talk about the organic process that led to Stories of Survival. And I'm a photographer, a photojournalist, and most of what I do is take pictures. And then often somebody else puts the words to the pictures. In March 2003, after the U.S. invasion of Iraq, I knew that in a few years, men and women would be coming back from war. And I was just curious what they would have to say about homecoming and their experiences at war. So I started a project called Exit Wounds after I'd talked to a few people. And if you want to show the next slide, Arielle, this is just two examples of the pictures. And I did interviews and transcribed the interviews, edited them, and they created the book. And there were 50 stories. And the next slide, please. And so this is Arturo Franco, and this was a flag that was given to him by his fellow soldiers when he ended his deployment. But when I was doing this book, I thought I probably should hear from someone from Iraq. And so I interviewed an Iraqi woman in Portland. And in the course of our interview, and it wasn't an interview that I'd be using in the book, but I said, tell me what you think about the US invasion of Iraq. And she said, I thank America for removing Saddam Hussein, but did you have to destroy my entire country to do it? And that made the hair on the back of my neck stand up. And I thought, we need to do another project with Iraqi refugees. And so the next slide shows a book that she brought with her. And I thought I'd be photographing portraits like I did with the Exit Wounds book, but I felt like the things that people brought with them really tell more of a story. And because everybody, when they leave, they often have to leave under the cover of darkness with maybe a kid under each arm, and they can only take so much. And so the question is, what do you take? And so Haifa Al-Habib brought her anthropology books because she's an academic and an artist. And the next slide shows what she wrote on top of my photograph of her book. And she wrote in Arabic about having to leave her homeland and then what will her new life be. And when I saw this, again, the hair on the back of my neck stood up because it really told me that this is the best way to tell these stories. And that's let the participants tell their own stories in their own words, in their own hand, and even in their own language. And the next slide shows an Iraqi flag that Ali brought with him. And he talks about having to leave the homeland, and occupiers came to his land and killed their people. And it was actually very poetic. And then the next slide is a torn apart photograph of this family's grandparents. And I love the fact that the photograph is torn apart, just like the participants' families have been torn apart, and they've been in the diaspora, moving all over the world. And then the next slide, and I put these in mostly because of what's happening in Ukraine right now. But this is a picture of Homs, Syria. And the next picture is Homs, Syria, after Assad and Putin leveled Homs. And then the next photograph is a picture taken in Kalamazoo, Michigan, of children of two families who were able to flee Homs, Syria, and come to Michigan. And you can see they're just like every kid. They're showing me their artwork after they came home from school. And so, we're seeing this human tragedy right now, and it relates to everything that we've been doing with stories of survival. And then there's just a couple more images. This is these girls' mothers, teacup and teapot, and she brought that to remember her country. And then the next slide is kind of an unexpected thing. We all expect certain kind of things from the Middle East, like teapots and different things that are that look like we expect. And I like how we break down stereotypes and preconceived notions. And so this girl brought her Barbie dolls. And so I hope that American girls relate to that and say, well, maybe we're not so different. And then she wrote, we all have had a childhood that it differs for everyone. And so when people write these really profound statements on the photographs, it really makes me feel like it's the most appropriate way of storytelling. And then we're just going to click through a few more before we actually arrive at stories of survival. But this man brought his tools, and the next person who's an artist, brought his paints, his tools. And then the next person brought his tools, musical instruments. And then anytime any of us leave our homes, always hoping we're going to come home, we bring our keys. But this family could never go back to their home because their home was destroyed. And so we had an exhibition of what we carried at the Illinois Holocaust Museum. And at the opening, Arielle and the director of the museum, Susan Abrams, pulled me aside and said, we would like to do a What We Carried Like project with our community, our collection. And that was another time when the hair on the back of my neck stood up, and I realized this is really an important opportunity. The clock is ticking, and we need to get started right away. And so we put our heads together and we started working on stories of survival. And Arielle, do you want to step in?
Sure. And what you'll see as we go through some of these slides is that what we really found is commonality. When we were with Jim on the second floor of the museum, we were literally above the permanent exhibition that's at the core of the Illinois Holocaust Museum. And these exactly same type of objects, house keys, a dinner plate that was used at family holidays, are the items that are in our collection that we hold, and are the same things that immigrants much more recently are bringing to the United States. So the museum saw an opportunity to tell a different yet similar story, one of Holocaust survivors, their connections to the past, and how they overcame hardship, as well as the stories of other genocide-affected communities and how they relate to their few objects from home. The exhibition allows the viewer to walk in someone else's shoes and experience through their eyes the effort to hold on to cherished memories while adapting to new circumstances. What struck the museum was the deep similarity between the Iraqi objects and the museum's collection. Everyone brings these same things to the US: a family photo, an identity card, a teddy bear. The objects included in this exhibition have survived the Holocaust, genocides, and conflicts, as Joe said at the beginning, in Armenia, Bosnia, Cambodia, Iraq, Rwanda, South Sudan, and Syria. We worked with partner organizations in the Chicago area and the state of Illinois, and also in northern Indiana, to connect with genocide-affected communities. We all know that Chicago and Illinois is a location where many immigrants come to, and many of them are fleeing these types of situations. So dislodged from their original surroundings, these seemingly ordinary objects are now storytellers. They represent futures that were forever altered. The exhibition allows us to explore the past, but also to connect it to today and the common experiences of these many groups of displacement, immigration, and starting over in a new home, while still holding on to memories, values, and customs from those previous lands. There are also, as you can see here, this is a pair of tefillin, which are a religious item that Jews wear often during prayer. There are a number of items, just as we previously saw the Quran that was brought to the United States. We see these religious items that people have brought with them to their new homes. All of these stories remind us of our commonalities, regardless of language, faith, or the generations that can be traced back in America. They are a link to humanity, one that binds us together. So you can see here an object from a survivor from Bosnia. She wrote this, just as Jim has already shown us. Jim showed us the Barbies. Here we see another baby doll that was saved by her father when she was 7 years old during the conflict. So Jim, I think some of these slides are a little out of order, but maybe we can come back to this object that you worked with a community member here, again, in the Chicago area.
Yeah, this was Susan Bawari's plate that they served food on at all of the family celebrations that her father had bought for her mother before they got married as a gift. And she writes about how precious this platter is. And she wrapped the platter and little teacups and saucers in her clothes when she fled Baghdad and tried to keep from breaking them. And so in her backpack, she had these items. And so what she wrote about in Arabic was just how precious these things were for her family's history.
This is an item that comes from a survivor of the Cambodian genocide, and she wrote this in Khmer on the image itself. This Khmer copper urn is a gift from my great-grandparents, who had kept it for generations. It is the souvenir I love the most because my great-grandparents gave it to me before they passed away. That urn was actually owned by her maternal great-grandmother. She hid it under the floorboards of the home when she heard the Khmer Rouge was closing in on their town. When they later went back to their home, they found that money that had been hidden in the walls of the house was gone, but the urn remained hidden under the floorboards. So this is one of, again, the few items that they were able to bring to the United States. So this is an object that when we mounted the exhibition at the Illinois Holocaust Museum was right up at the front of the exhibition and also is there at the Presidential Library. The reason we chose this is it really shows the multiple layers of this project that Jim has created with survivors. So Jim takes the objects, he photographs them on a plain white background. And in this case, he actually put, two images together because we see both the front and back of the letter. And then as we'll see, as we've seen already in previous slides, these large-scale photographs are given back to the donor or survivor, and then they actually interact with the photograph, however it is that they see fit. So in this case, this is a letter from a Red Army Jewish service person, so someone who served in and fought for the Soviet Union during World War II. He was Jewish. He knew that as they pushed westward, that his town, where his parents had been liberated by the Red Army. So this letter, the black script that you can see, is him communicating to his parents saying, how are you? Is everyone safe? How has it been? He hasn't seen his family in a number of years. And you can see the lower script that's in sort of a purplish color. This is actually from the postmaster of his town. And you can even make out a date possibly where it says 1942. It says 42. And what the postmaster is explaining is that his parents, along with all the other Jews of this town, were killed 2 years prior when the Einsatzgruppen, when the mobile killing squads behind the advancing German army murdered all of the Jews in the town. So then surrounding this really incredible object is the son of this service person. So the son of the service person was the one who responded in this case. And I'm just going to read a few bits of this. He said, "My dad fasted on March 6th every year for as long as I can remember. This was the date in 1942 that his family, along with other Jewish people in his hometown of Syria, were killed by the Nazis." And then at the very end, it was also important for Jim and I to put this piece at the beginning of the exhibition because of the sentiment that we hear in this conclusion. There are two lessons to be learned from his story. This first, as is often the case with stories from the Holocaust, is to never forget. It happened, it cannot be forgotten, and it cannot be repeated with anyone. The second is that anybody can rebuild their life, even when tragic things happen. You can overcome the tragedy and create a good life. So, Jim, I don't know if you want to take Gabriel.
Sure. I'm going to read what Gabriel wrote on his photograph. And he says, "My name is Gabriel Dutt. I took this picture of my father and I in Juba, Republic of South Sudan, in the year 2007. He was my hero and my role model in life. I only spent a very short time at home with my father and mother and son. We were separated by the civil war in Sudan, which forced me to leave my village at a young age of 7 years old. For the next 20 years, I lived in various refugee camps in East Africa. When I became a citizen of the United States in 2007, my first priority was to go and visit my parents. The words of advice that my dad told me were unforgettable. He told me to be a good man, treat others with dignity and respect, told me to get married and find a wife. This ended up being the last time I saw my dad. Life is what it is. I now have children of my own. I hope my two boys have some of the qualities of my dad. There are no words to describe the love between parents and their children. It's a universal language that everyone feels. I love you, Dad."
And I think what we can see both in Gabriel's photograph, and now this is, again, a Holocaust survivor and her sister, is there are those survivors of conflicts and of war that have nothing. Some people have the religious items that we saw previous. Some people have house keys to the home. Some people have baby dolls and Barbies. Gabriel had nothing. He only had the photograph taken so many years later of his father. And here we do have Sala Lewis and her sister. And in her story that she tells surrounding the photograph, she explains how her sister really became the mother that she lost during the Holocaust and was the reason that she believed she survived the Holocaust. Here we have a story that I will let Jim explain.
Okay. This is a train set that Ralph Raybach sent to Chicago to when his family was fleeing. And when they left, they could only, I think, take $3 with them. I think that's how it is. And so, but they could send things to the U.S. And so when I photographed the train set, and I was working in the basement of the Illinois Holocaust Museum, and you can see I spread out a big piece of white photo paper, and I assembled the train set. And I know what trains look like and how they work, and so I thought I had done a pretty good job. And so I photographed it and then made the print, and the Illinois Holocaust Museum gave the print to Ralph to write his story. And he looked at it and he said, "No, this is not the way you set up the electric train." And so then I came back to the Illinois Holocaust Museum, and Ralph came and he helped me set up the train, and we worked together on it. And as we were chatting and putting it together, somebody walked by the room and they said, "You look like two little boys putting together your electric train." And we're not young kids anymore. And so it was really a sweet moment when, I got to know Ralph, and we had to put this train set together again, and it just topped off the kind of bonding experience, and it made a really nice photograph. And I can read an excerpt of what Ralph wrote. He said, "My father purchased this wonderful Marklin electric train set for me to take with us to America. It was a great toy, which was always loved by me, my children, and my grandchildren through these many years. 80 years have gone by after the train left Germany with our family. We were saved by cousins in Chicago who sponsored our ability to enter the U.S. That was the only way German Jews like us and our train were able to escape the Nazis and find a new home and life in the United States of America."
And I also want to point out that at the bottom, you can see that Ralph undertook this writing project on July 4th. And it could have been just the day that he decided to take this on. But there, interestingly, are a lot of connections to the 4th of July in the exhibition. You can also see that there's a pair of boarding passes from a Yazidi survivor that are included in the exhibition. And that person was able to flee Iraq for Jordan on their way to the United States on July 4th. And if you have ever met Holocaust survivors or survivors of other genocide, they are often the most patriotic people that you can meet, because they do see that they are extremely thankful that this country gave them an opportunity to live their lives, practice their religion, and all of it within the safety afforded to us as Americans. So you can see that here. I also wanted to share with you tonight that there were very interesting responses to the project. So not only did people write with calligraphy or their script, oftentimes too we had participants say, "Oh, I can't write myself. I'm too senior at this point. I don't like my handwriting anymore." And so they actually had maybe a relative or sort of a surrogate write their response for them. But in this case, we got back to us a really interesting response. The family member had taken Jim's large-scale photograph and cut it down to a very small photograph of just the house keys. He then took the photograph of the house keys, adhered it to a poster board, and then went through the process through, I'm not sure what design program, but basically created a graphic novel of his grandfather's escape from Europe through multiple different countries, and then, of course, to the United States. So this was one, again, truly incredible response that we had to the project. Here we have the wedding announcement of Carl, who was a refugee from the Holocaust, and Sally, who was a Chicagoan. I'm going to use the Yiddish word, a shidduch was made, a match was made between relatives in Chicago and someone in the Dominican Republic who had met Carl. And so they sent Sally down, and it worked out. They actually they got engaged, and then soon after were married. And the response to our request to participate in this program is that they had all of the grandchildren of this marriage put their hands in paint and then mark the photograph. And then here we have another really interesting story. This is a young child who was born in a displaced persons camp in Europe, a child of 2 survivors. And when we showed her the photograph, this photograph, where her image was small but was alone on the white piece of photographic paper, and she looks, of course, adorable. She's a cute little child, and she's wearing a cute outfit, and she's got this very kind of fancy baby carriage. And we thought it was just wonderful. Well, to her, her experiences of growing up during that time period, living with her parents, knowing about the Holocaust, and even in the years, you know, a lot of that information becomes informed in the years that come subsequently. She didn't want it to be just a cute little baby. She wanted to express the feelings that she associated to the time, so that it was crowded, that it was desolate, there was loneliness because, you know, families had lost everyone. There were many marriages and many babies born just to create new family. So this is the artwork that she sent back to us, and it literally had this chicken wire on top of the photograph. And when I received the artwork, I looked at it and I said, "Oh my gosh, this isn't what Jim is going to want. This isn't how he wants his project to work." And Jim, you can, of course, give your reaction.
And I told Arielle that I love it, you know, and I really love, and I've always loved how, you know, participants, you know, don't ask, you know, should I write in pencil or should I write in pen? Should I write in line? You know, and the fact that this was something that was so authentic to her. I mean, it, again, sometimes the hair on the back of my neck stands up, and when I see this, it just tells me that she really told the story the way she wanted to tell the story. And, you know, with all of these photographs and writing, you know, we really have created authentic bits of history. And I know from, you know, my father, who was a World War II vet and didn't talk about World War II until he was in his later stages of dementia, and with genocide and Holocaust survivors, those are times that sometimes people just want to forget. And I feel like this project gives people permission to approach their stories in their own way, at their own speed. And these are family documents that will live forever. And so I really feel that you know, we've all profited by having these historic documents created in this kind of odd, organic way. So I'm just so proud of how this project has evolved.
Another thing that I wanted to point out, and I think we've already even touched on it at the beginning, is of course the similarities of what people have. Included in the exhibition is a set of dominoes from the Second World War. They were a gift to Olga Weiss, who you see her writing there. She was passing as a Christian child, and it was important for her parents that she understood that she had a Christmas gift from St. Nicholas. Also, when she went to school, to keep up the continuation of the story that she was a Christian child. And here we see the dominoes of an Iraqi refugee. This is the gift that his friends gave to him, that he used and played with his friends in Baghdad, and he brought it with him so that he could remember everything that he was leaving behind. Here we have a recipe book, again associated to the Holocaust time period. This is from a woman. This was her aunt. They immigrated to Milwaukee. She brought over with her this recipe book that included all of these traditional German recipes that they had from Germany. And when she came to the United States, she closed the book and she never cooked these recipes again. And her niece sort of laments that fact. And here this is a local survivor of 2 concentration camps in Bosnia from the Bosnian Wars. Both of his brothers were killed. One is still missing in action. And he had learned while he was in one of the concentration camps, they had actually, in this amazing connection to the past, the Bosnians that were in this concentration camp had heard that during World War II, people in Auschwitz and other Nazi camps had thought about and dreamt about and talked about family recipes as a way to convince their brains that they weren't as hungry as they were. So they did the same. They took, here, the example, are cigarette papers. Cigarettes did make their way into these concentration camps. The survivor here, Mike, said that he never smoked before in his life. He's never smoked since. But at that point in time, there wasn't enough food, so he would smoke, but he would smoke from this handmade pipe. They then would take the papers, the cigarette papers, and instead of using them to smoke, they wrote down all of these recipes. They wanted to make sure that they had all of this documented because they were living through a genocide. And still, when you talk to Mike, we have an exhibition coming up at the museum in a number of years that's actually about the history of Jewish delis and how many Holocaust survivors were very connected to them, found them as a resource, especially as new immigrants to the country. And there were a number of people at the museum that were a little bit confused as to why we would host this exhibition about food. And Mike was the person who really spoke up. He raised his hand and he raised his voice, and he said, in genocide destroys not only the people, it wants to wipe out the culture. And essential to every cultural group is food culture. And it was with that comment that the rest of the exhibitions committee really decided to forge ahead with this, because as we see through all of these different objects, it is about religion, it's about childhood, it's about relationships. It also includes food culture. So that's what we see represented here. These are another incredible object that he has from the concentration camps, which were care packages from the Red Cross that were sent to the inmates. These are actually hand cut out of those boxes, playing cards that they had to play clandestinely, but they filled the time while these people were incarcerated in these camps. So these are handmade playing cards. Here, I'll let Jim jump in.
Okay. This is the plane tickets that Arielle was talking about. And Kasim, all he could bring were these airline tickets. And he said, "This is my ticket from when I first traveled from Iraq to the United States on July 4th, 2012. I have kept these tickets in my wallet for the past 6 years because it reminds me of when I first left my country. I stayed one day in Jordan, and on the second day, I went to New York and then Chicago and finally arrived in Nebraska. Now I study biochemistry and pre-pharmacy at University of Lincoln. I will graduate in 2018. And Qasim fled the ISIS genocide on the Yazidi people in northern Iraq. And so, he was able to find Lincoln, Nebraska, where now there's 3,000 Yazidis living in Lincoln. And one thing I love about these projects is, when we have I work with the community for a period of time. And then once we have the exhibition, it's in a museum and the general public comes out. But usually the local news agencies come. And so they do an interview with me, standing with the photographs in the museum, and they interview Qasim and a couple other Yazidi people, and they show the gallery. And what I love about this is this work and the stories break beyond the brick and mortar of the museum, and the local community gets to know the people that they've been seeing around town that maybe have darker skin, dress a little different, and now they know who they are. And then eventually someone from the community offers to do an ESL class, and other members of the community offer to donate pots and pans and furniture. And so my goal with all of these projects is to reach out. And the other thing I hope happens when people view the photographs is they put themselves in the shoes of the participant. They put themselves in the shoes of the refugee or the Holocaust or genocide survivor. And then they start to think, well, if I had to leave tonight, what would I take? And then the next question, besides what would I take, is, oh, what am I leaving behind? And that's everything else. That's your community, your university, the shops in your neighborhood, your language, your religion, and you're going to you don't know where. And so I hope this process of viewing the photographs creates empathy and compassion. And maybe we start to realize, like Arielle was saying, we are all one. These are the similarities. These are who we all are. We all want the same thing: safety, a roof over our heads. We want our children to go to school, do better than we did. And so, I think these messages do land, and that's what we're all trying to do.
We're just going to share a few more slides, and then we will, as Joe said, open it up for questions. But there is only one survivor in the exhibition who does have 4 objects and 4 photographs that are on display. And so I wanted to just spend a few moments talking about the survivor. Her name is Immaculée. Immaculée is a survivor from Northwest Indiana of the Rwandan genocide. So she has, from the time period, 4 items that we are really the most honored to be trusted with these objects, to be in the exhibition and to be on display. One of them, as you can see here, is a family photo album. Her 3-year-old and her 5-year-old were killed in the Rwandan genocide along with her husband. So for the photo album, what Immaculée did is she really wrote a love letter to her husband, thanking him for the husband and father that he was. And then the other items that are in the exhibition, and admittedly, these are very difficult items to see. Within our own exhibition at the museum in Skokie, we really kind of had them at the center of the show. And I know that Lance, thank you, Lance Tauser, who put together the exhibition in Springfield, has put them really at sort of the crux of the gallery where you turn the corner. These are the items of clothing that Immaculée in 2017 went back to Rwanda to identify within a mass grave her children. They were doing roadworks in the area, and they knew that they would possibly be near the area where this mass grave was. And so these items of clothing are of Immaculate's children. There's a dress here, another dress, and a sweater. And one of the things that I think is really important is not only to truly be a witness to what has happened in Rwanda and to Immaculate's family, but also to see, the incredible nature of this project. Not only did she detail some of what happened to her children, who her children were, but she also, in this wonderful way, decorated these photographs with flowers and bows and fireworks, because these were children that were taken from her. And I think she not only is telling this awful story, but she also is recognizing that these were her little girls, and she's celebrating that. And the one thing that I would say about this, and even, I was thinking about it with the airline, the boarding passes, he said that he carried those with him all the time. I was going to say, until they were in this exhibition, and they're traveling around. The same is true of these dresses. We were very concerned as this traveled beyond the Illinois Holocaust Museum that we should possibly not include all of Immaculate's 4 items. This is the items that she has of her murdered family. And yet when we talked to Immaculate herself, she said that by showing these dresses, by showing these photographs and their story, it keeps her children alive for more people to hear those stories. And so as we end, the one thing I was going to show you is that, of course, behind all these incredible objects and these incredible photographs, the creative photographic writing project that Jim created and we kind of jumped on and hope to expand with him, is truly, as you can see here, the people behind the objects. And so with that, I think we're going to send it back to you, Joe. This might be the first time that Jim and I actually kept it together and didn't cry during a presentation. Yeah. So I think I'll stop sharing, and I think we're ready for some questions.
Well, that was going to be one of my first questions before we go to some questions and comments from the audience. We're back live at the Abraham Lincoln Presidential Library and Museum. I'm Joe Crane, of course, joined by Arielle Weiniger and Jim Lomason, who is an award-winning photographer and author living in Portland, Oregon. He helped co-create this exhibit, a very powerful exhibit, with Arielle, who is the Chief Curator of Collections and Exhibitions for the Illinois Holocaust Museum and Education Center in the Chicago area, in Skokie, I recall, if the exact location of the museum. And you said it was the first time you've done this presentation together that you were able to actually get through it together. That was going to be my question to lead off, is when you were putting this together originally, how tough was it at times to just go through this material and learn the stories and try to put it in a meaningful way that would be understandable to other folks? It just seems like this would be just such a emotionally taxing project to put together.
Yeah, it definitely was at times difficult, and as objects were coming to me, and I was alone in a classroom in the basement of the Illinois Holocaust Museum, And the objects were brought to me on a cart with just small descriptions. And so I kind of knew a little bit of the story. And there were a few times when I just had to close the door. And especially with the blood-stained dress, I just wept. And throughout these projects, the work has been profoundly affecting, and there have been times when people ask me, well, how do I manage and how do I deal with this, and sometimes I don't deal with it very well. And Arielle, do you have thought?
I guess I would reiterate what I just said about Immaculée. She personally, when she talks about this, she went to Rwanda to collect, to identify her children, to collect these items. And she thought it somehow would maybe give her a certain sense of closure. And instead, she actually became very ill for a number of months. She couldn't leave the bed. But ultimately, she speaks regularly about what happened to her family. Working at the Illinois Holocaust Museum, we, of course, have our amazing Holocaust survivors who still speak to children regularly, even now, once again, now post-COVID. Bringing these stories, bringing Immaculate's stories to the widest audience possible is what she wants to have happen. She wants people to know these stories and to know about her children. Miroslav from Bosnia, he wants as many people as possible to know what happened to him, his brothers, and others. So I think that's where I think I'm gonna speak for Jim, but what we hope for is a better world, and we have to learn and hear about these very difficult and tragic time periods, wars, displacement, in order to understand that this cannot continue. And unfortunately, it does, and we're seeing a lot of things currently right now. We all just have to work together to create a more peaceful and better world and society.
That is definitely a great sentiment, Arielle. And we have just a few minutes left for those of you watching on Facebook or YouTube. Please chime in. I've got both chats open, and we've had a number of folks from Indiana, New York, Illinois, of course, Colorado, Washington State watching with us tonight. And if you have a question in the next couple of minutes about the exhibit for Jim and Arielle, please chime in. A comment from a viewer in Renton, Washington, not far from you, Jim, out in Portland, Oregon, said, thank you for your work and effort. And Sharon in Colorado Springs, Colorado says, I had the opportunity to hear firsthand from, this is what you were kind of talking about, Jim, with, I believe, your father, and that World War II generation didn't always share their stories of their experiences. And sometimes it was too late to collect that oral history, but others have. And she says she had the opportunity to hear firsthand from her father. He was an American soldier in World War II at the Big Red One, Normandy, Battle of the Bulge, the Remagen Bridge, freed Buchenwald and into France. And certainly that is a big part of the story, that greatest generation that helped end the tragedies of World War II, and yet, as we see even up to now with what's going on in Ukraine, these tragedies continue. But as this exhibit shows, it's stories of survival, and I think that's where you see that positive aspect to it, that no matter the trials and tribulations these folks have been through, they're able to survive it and more importantly, share these stories with the rest of the world to know that, yes, these tragedies happen, but as you said, Arielle, we can live for a better day.
Yeah, I was going to jump in earlier, Jim, when you were talking about Kasim, who's in Lincoln, Nebraska. For the exhibition, for those that get to the museum to see it, with each large-scale photograph, we have a text panel that shows the name of the survivor, where they were born, if they're still with us, and there's a small photograph, and so of the person who the object was associated to. And as the exhibition was getting put together and we were trying to finalize it, I kept emailing to the point of harassing Kasim, saying, Kasim, I need a photograph of you. I need it for the label. And we have to go to the printer. And he kept not getting back to me. And then finally he did. And he sent me, this is again the refugee who had the boarding passes. He sent me a photograph of himself in his cap and his gown with this massive a bunch of balloons that he was holding. And it was because he had just graduated from pharmacy school, and he was so apologetic that he couldn't get me the photograph on time, but or as fast as I needed it. But he was busy with finals. And when I got that, I said, forget it. Like we've made it. We've made the deadline, and congratulations. I mean, that is the story. That's the story of survival. I mean, getting through the challenges and war and all the things he had to go through, and now he was graduating from the University of Nebraska. It was a wonderful moment. And Joe, as you've said, and I'll hand it back over to Jim, but it ultimately it is hopeful. People, as we said with the letter at the Red Army letter at the beginning of the exhibition, that last thought was that you can have a good life and you can build a good life, even with the tragedies of the past. Jim.
Yeah, and I think all the stories are stories of survival and resilience, and most of the participants, maybe they were before or maybe they weren't, but I find that many of the participants become very active, and now that they've told their stories, in one way they feel more comfortable telling the bigger story, and I see this show as a call to action. I love when I drive by wherever the show is being shown and I see school buses and children who are now coming to learn about these histories. And, one thing we do learn when we look at this mix of genocides and the Holocaust is there's a through line. And the through line is that they all start in such benign, small steps. And if you look up the 10 stages of genocide, the first stage is classification, documentation, and then pretty soon there's a kind of othering and dehumanization, and then name calling. In Rwanda, people were called cockroaches. In Germany, people were called vermin. We had a presidential candidate that called Mexicans rapists and murderers, and we elected him as our president. So these steps, may not always lead to this horrific ending, but they're all steps in othering and demonizing and xenophobia. And so I think we just need to be alert. And I think this project, Stories of Survival, helps us to understand more about that and how they can become these horrible things that we never could imagine, but they're happening again. And we need to fight that.
Let's finish off tonight our conversation. Each of you share with us your perhaps a short story of your most meaningful part of the exhibit. So when folks come to the Abraham Lincoln Presidential Library and Museum between now and January of 2023 to see the exhibit in person, what's the one portion of the exhibit that people should really focus in on and pay attention to? And then from that standpoint, too, also share with us your final hopes for what you hope that people get out of viewing the exhibit.
I'm going to go first because I'm going to make Jim answer your question about what people take away. What I would say is, Joe, you've asked us an unfair question of, which child do we love the most? So, I think obviously there are I think it's 65 photographs in the exhibition. So there are a lot of stories. We've talked about a number of them tonight, but obviously not all of them. What I would say to visitors who can make it to the museum, there is an audio-visual loop at the beginning of the exhibition. And what it does is it shows some pull quotes and then kind of connects them to the object that they're associated with. And I think that because this is a collaborative photography and in many ways writing project, some people might be a little overwhelmed if they look at the gallery and see, oh, there's so much writing, I'm not sure where I should go or what I should focus on. And I think that what is advantageous is if you go to the museum, you watch the attract loop, you might actually see, oh, there's a story about a painting I really am interested in. There's a story about the teddy bear that I really want to check into further. So I don't think that we at the Illinois Holocaust Museum or at the Abraham Lincoln Library Museum or Jim for that matter are thinking that every person is going to read every story. There's a lot to take in this exhibition, which is another reason that you might want to visit multiple times. But I think, pick and choose. Visually, people can decide what might be something interesting for them, and then they'll hook into that story. And yeah, make your way through some of these people's amazing stories of survival and ultimately hopeful responses to very difficult situations.
Yeah, and I would also say, that I've been really amazed and impressed when I've been a fly on the wall at the exhibition and I watched viewers. I'm involved in a lot of art galleries and different aspects, and I see people kind of walk in, look at a painting, look at the title, look at the price, and move on. And they're not even thinking about buying, but they're just, tourists. But when I see people at Stories of Survival, they do look at things in their own way, at their own pace, but they do spend a lot of time reading the actual writing. And I'm so glad that the writing wasn't transcribed and then printed out as text, because that's so much easier to read. But I like the fact that you have to work a little harder and you get more involved with the story and the photograph, and I think it resonates more. And so, my hope with, one of my many hopes with Stories of Survival is that we put ourselves in the shoes of the participants, and we think about, not only what we would take and what we're leaving behind, but think about, each of these stories, is a family and an extended family that maybe doesn't exist anymore. And my hope is that we speak out more, we get involved more, and we're not just passive about world events. And there are those times when we're at Thanksgiving dinner and somebody says something that we might give them a pass because it's Thanksgiving and we want to be polite and we want to keep our family together. But there are times that we just have to say, we need to think about what you just said, and I don't agree. And you do have to be an upstander, and you do have to speak out, because if we're not doing it at this incremental level, we're never going to do it on a global scale. So we do have to speak up. And
very well said, Jim. Jim Lomason and Arielle Weiniger are the co-creators of the just powerful exhibit that you have to see and experience and just really take in and give yourself some time to really experience the stories that are told and the powerful images and artifacts that you'll see. It's Stories of Survival, Object, Image, Memory, new exhibit in partnership with the Illinois Holocaust Museum and Education Center here at the Abraham Lincoln Presidential Library and Museum. The exhibit runs through January of 2023, so you have plenty of time to see it. And we have some other programs throughout the rest of the year, including a couple coming up within the next month or so related to the exhibit. And we invite you to check out details on that by going to the events page and clicking on all events to see what they are at presidentlincoln.illinois.gov. And I know, Arielle, we have one coming up on May 15th for families that is going to be a fun but very engaging program with Ms. Stone from Chicago, who you've worked with in past programs. It's going to be coming down to share a storytelling exhibit, storytelling program with us.
Yes, she's a wonderful storyteller, and it would be a great time for families to get together and learn about how to share stories.
All right.
How to share family stories.
Very good. Jim and Arielle, thank you so much for your time, and thank you for co-creating such a powerful exhibit that we are very proud to be showing here at the Abraham Lincoln Presidential Library and Museum in Springfield.
Thank you so much to the Abraham Lincoln Presidential Library and Museum. I mean, this is really an honor for us, so I really think this is wonderful.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you, Joe and Lance and all of the staff and at the museum. We're, as Jim said, we're so very proud that it's there.
And we're very grateful to the two of you for coming up with such a powerful exhibit. Thank you so much for joining us, whether you're watching on Facebook around the state, across the nation, or even around the world, or on our YouTube channel. We thank you for joining us and hope you can join us soon to see the exhibit and also join us for some upcoming programs. Again, all the information on the exhibit and upcoming programs and all the other programs we offer available right there when you click on presidentlincoln.illinois.gov. Thanks for watching. Have a good evening.